in this business who worked in the time that we worked in the last 70 years were blessed, because we weren't, but the business was a trailblazer, and we were a part of that. We were kind of like the pioneers as they crossed over the Great Divide and went to the West and explored brand new territory.
Very simple compared to today, but at that time, it was just as exciting.
We didn't just take pictures, and we had to learn to tell stories.
It was scary. It was scary, and you had to be an absolute black to put the staples in, to put the pieces together, and the thing would break. It would be a disaster.
The tape cassettes were like an encyclopedia. I mean, they were this big.
It was kind of like doing weather from the seat of your pants, if you will.
You know, it could be a quiet day, but all of a sudden, everything breaks loose and let's go, let's go. So you got to get the adrenaline going again.
What you think you're going to be doing at 9 can change by noon, can change by 5.
It was a period of dynamic growth.
Oh my God, it was like heaven. You realize this was the biggest studio in the state of Pennsylvania?
When we went on the air, our signal reaches 33 counties in western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland. And that's where we got that serving millions from atop the Alleghenies.
Serving millions from atop the Alleghenies. 70 years ago, the modern miracle of television became a reality here. WJAC went on the air as Channel 13 in September of 1949. The first station in Johnstown, the 79th in the nation, giving you front row seats to local, national, even global events. It was a whole new world to every owner of a television set. And in the development of the TV industry, WJAC ranks among the pioneers. WJAC's broadcasting history began with radio.
The license was owned by Charlie Price, Sr. And he had, at the time where Supus Motors is, he had a car dealership down there. And he had the original radio license for WJAC. And I don't know how it was decided that he wanted to get rid of that license. And that's when Mr. Krebs, who was the publisher of the Tribune Democrat at the time, saw radio as a competitor, of course. You know, he's a business guy. He says, well, that's a competition for my newspaper, so he bought the radio license. That's when the Johnstown Auto Club came from that connection with the automotive industry, so to speak.
What amazed me is Carl Gillespie and Walter Krebs made the decision to go into television broadcasting. And Carl did some market research, and there weren't very many television sets in the market, and there weren't many people selling television sets. And that they had the vision to see the growth, the potential growth of the industry, and they decided to go into television broadcasting. And that was a real gamble in those days.
In 1946, the Federal Communications Commission approved a television station construction permit for WJAC. 3 years later, the station was on the air.
Well, I know in the early days when we were Channel 13, we cherry-picked from CBS, ABC, NBC, and Dumont, the Dumont network, and we purchased programming from those 4 sources, and that's what we programmed the station with. And then the Federal Communications Commission discovered the fact that you cannot have 2 stations' signals overlap because they block each other out. They block each other out. And Channel 13 was going on the air in Pittsburgh. And so 5 years after we went on the air, and Channel 13 celebrating their 65th anniversary this year, they moved us to Channel 6.
In 1952, the FCC lifted its freeze on the number of channels available for commercial television. Channel 6 was assigned to Johnstown, giving WJAC TV nearly 8 times more power. In October of 1952, when Channel 6 went on the air, The coverage area included parts of 5 states with a population of more than 3 million people.
And that's where we got that serving millions from atop the Alleghenies, because that's how broad our signal was and how powerful our signal was.
WJAC's first studio looked nothing like this one. In fact, there's much more to the TV station than what you see here. The heart of WJAC actually sits about 6 air miles away from this building.
The heart of the TV station is on Laurel Ridge, because without that place, we'd have nothing really. That's the last link between this studio, this facility here, and our viewer is that transmitter site.
Few WJAC employees have traveled this road, but in our early days, this was a trip made by our staff every day.
But what people don't know is the actual transmissions came from Laurel Mountain, and the studio was up there.
So you would go up there in a Jeep, all 4 of us, 5, whichever the crew was. We'd go up and stay there and be done, relieved by another crew.
They had a kitchen and a sleeping area, plus the control room, because the guys would get snowed in and the replacement crew couldn't get to the tower.
This area is the transmitter. So there's 3 cabinets, and each cabinet can operate by itself. So if we have a failure, we could go with just 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3 at reduced power and a reduced coverage area. But generally, all 3 of them, work together to give us our full power.
Also inside the transmitter building, you'll find remnants of years gone by.
This was master control, apparently. The transmitter was here on this wall, kind of in the middle, and then in the front here was master control, where they did the on-air switching and so forth.
The photographers actually processed their film up there and everything, and it was put on air up there.
I think this was the projector room. They had, I don't know how many different projectors they had in there, but everything back then was either live, film, or network.
I was about the size of that room, and you had a bar across the top with curtains on and some other stuff, and all the drapes were set up on the wall. So you'd have to go between programs, take it out, lay it on the floor, and go back to the camera. And when you get the next program, if they were back to back, they'd go to black and put another one up. That was our studio and crew, 1 guy.
This was the studio. About all that's left that you could maybe tell that it was once a studio is that pipe that's going up there. That's where they hung the lights from.
I would come in, I would sit down. Good evening, everybody. You're watching 6 News right here.
That's it.
This is it. This is where it all started.
Yep, that's the way it was.
And outside, standing tall, possibly one of the most iconic symbols of WJAC TV, our broadcast tower. The top reaches more than 3,000 feet into the sky.
See those 2 dishes there?
Yes.
I think the upper one is sending information back to Hickory Lane, and the lower one is receiving information from Hickory Lane.
How is it that I'm sitting on the news set on Hickory Lane reading a story and it comes out from here almost instantaneously?
Right into people's living rooms. Well, the transmitter takes a very small signal that leaves this building at Hickory Lane and goes up to a mountaintop location up on top of Laurel Ridge on a microwave path with a very high frequency beam of radio waves. And then it's received up on Laurel Ridge, and then it's put into a device called the transmitter, which makes it much, much stronger, and then it's put into a large antenna, which sends it out to our viewers, about a 60-mile radius.
That was the start of WJAC up on the mountain.
It didn't take long for WJAC to outgrow its small studio on top of Laurel Mountain. It was clear there was a need for more space. So in the fall of 1954, WJAC acquired this building in Johnstown's Cambria City neighborhood.
Well, we located a property down in Cambria City at the corner of Chestnut Street and 10th Avenue. It was being used as a welding shop by Harold Axemaker. And Harold was ready to lease it or sell it, and it gave us line of sight to the transmitter, which was absolutely essential. Plus, it kept us in the city of Johnstown, which we were wanted at that time. So we made a deal with Axie, as we called him, and renovated his building down in Canberra City. We used it for a studio that was 30 feet by 40 feet, which gave us 1,200 square feet of studio space. We had space for our news department. We had space for our film editing department.
You know what a gazunder is?
No.
We used to have a whole prop room full of gazunders. That was Dino Tesseri, Jim Yoder, and Elmer Dupre's name for things that you put under things so they would be high enough for the camera to shoot, because you couldn't get low enough for the camera to shoot straight on.
In February of 1955, after it was converted into a TV studio, the equipment was moved in.
It gave us room to operate. We were able to produce programs in Canberra City, such as Romper Room. We started Romper Room down there. We ran Heaven Speaks, which was at that time, a very popular 15-minute religious program. We held telethons in Canberra City.
I did musicals out of there downtown. This was when I set up 4 or 5 different sets. So you go from one to another to another to another. One guy did a whole musical program of country and western.
It provided us the opportunity to get participants into the studio area. It provided us the opportunity to get flats and additional material into the studio area through these doors. We then were able to have an audience for any of our shows. Whatever we put on, we had an audience. We had them in there, and they made a lot of noise, which is necessary. Plus, it gave us an opportunity to, as I mentioned, line of sight to our transmitter. Just behind you and to our right, over that on the second floor of that extension, we built an addition. And in that addition, we housed our microwave facilities. And they faced directly up to Laurel Hill Mountain, over there where our transmitter is. So we had no problems in that sense. The building provided us with all the facilities we needed at that time.
By the time the 60s arrived, WJAC had outgrown another studio. Our next move would be to a new building designed for television, one that would allow us to combine our business and production operations in a single location. This is the house that WJAC built.
Moving into this building was huge. The building we were in you could have put 6 places that size in here, and we thought it was amazing. We felt really great having a place like this to work at, and it was it's not just for Johnstown. This building was a first of its kind operation, but with everything the way it was set up. It was featured in National Broadcasting Magazine.
Walter Krebs was very close friends of the people who owned WJAL, and I don't remember their name.
That's okay.
But he went down and toured their facility and looked at their design. And he followed their design. Their station looked like a schoolhouse. That's why we look like a schoolhouse.
WJAC's new home would still have to be in line of sight with the transmitter to allow the relay of signals. The ideal location was found to be here on Hickory Lane in suburban Johnstown. So in August of 1963, the broadcast-telecast complex was complete. The radio and television stations moved in and together for the first time embarked on a new era in television.
Oh my God, it was like heaven. You realize this was the biggest studio in the state of Pennsylvania? It really was studio, it was large. And the first station really to go live color. Live color. We were the first. I had people from Pittsburgh, WTIE, come in and see what we were doing with the color cameras.
Was the first full-powered VHF on 6, or on any VHF frequency between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia at the time.
Back then, the control room was full of people, each with an important role. From the director to the tape deck to the audio board, even the studio's massive cameras were manually operated. Now they're robotic. The entire process computerized.
You walk in your control room now and look at it compared to when I first started here, there is monitors everywhere. It's just unbelievable how many monitors there are for the different situations. I mean, you're putting on a newscast, you've got monitors for your various remote sites and monitors for your what's going to be up next on air, what's previewing, and it's unbelievable what a control room looks like now compared to 20 years ago.
This is 6 News, coverage you can count on.
Video. It's what once separated television from newspaper and radio. And the cameras and formats used to bring you the news have changed drastically over the years. They're smaller, safer, and better. It began with still images or slides of events and people.
We also had the AP or Associated Press photos that came in on, and then I would clear that machine and I would color them with color pencils. Though one time I did put a pink shirt on Richard Nixon. I couldn't help myself. I didn't get in any trouble, nobody noticed. Oh, and then Mary was doing sports for Mary Parks. They had her fill in for Bill Wilson, which, oh. But anyway, she wanted me to color some sports pictures for her. Well, there's a problem because I don't watch sports. I have no clue. You know, they have certain colors. That didn't work so well. I said, couldn't you use some black and white?
Then came 16mm film. It was expensive, so footage was limited both in the field and on the air.
When I started here, we were shooting news on 16mm film. And Andy Rakowski, Ray Kleitz were the two main guys. And these guys ran all day, all night with cameras in their trunks, cans of film. If something happened in the middle of the night, Ron Stevens would call them and they went and shot it. Kind of like it is today, but a lot more primitive, a lot more crude. And of course you had to run the film through the processor.
And then it was edited by physically cutting the film and sticking it together with glue.
This thing seemed to, every time we'd go to make a film run, it would break. And we, and you had, an alarm would go off, you'd see photographers running.
It was scary. It was scary. And you had to be an absolute black to put the staples in, to put the pieces together, and if the thing would break, it would be a disaster. When I was watching that machine, I was praying the whole time that it wouldn't break. Please don't break.
There was many times that JD, myself, and some of the other photographers that took care of processing the film would increase the temperature of the chemicals so we could run it through faster to get it on the air.
It was a lot slower process to get stuff on the air. But as I look back, it's amazing what a good job we did getting news on when it really happened.
In the early 80s, videotape opened the door to a whole new world.
With the advent of tape, it meant you were going to see more things covered because you could get around and do more. It was easier to do. You didn't have to process it, so you could get it on the air quicker. And so that turned out to be a real benefit and a benefit for viewers.
WJAC made the transition to the RCA TK76. A single camera cost $42,000. It recorded in standard definition on 3/4-inch tape.
The tape cassettes were like an encyclopedia. I mean, they were this big. The poor photographers.
You got to keep in mind, when we first got into electronic videotape recording, you had a camera, you had a battery belt for a camera, you had a tape deck, you had a battery belt for the tape deck, you had a light that had to go on top of the camera, and you had a battery for that.
They told us we had to be able to carry 75 pounds. And it's like, at that time, I barely, I was about double that.
Now we carry cameras with computers in them. I don't carry so much stuff anymore, which is, I'm 87 years old. Carrying all that stuff, it's getting a little tiring.
Then came Super VHS, followed by DVC Pro.
The big thing about this is that this is the first time that we are recording in digital. Previous to this, everything was analog.
A bit later, WJAC transitioned out of videotape with P2.
And this was a huge thing for us because Then we could edit it in what's called a nonlinear way, where you don't have to have videotape machines or real-time, recording of the material. It was just all, you just choose your pieces, and it's very, very quick and easy.
Now our photographers use this camera, the JVC 890. It costs less than 10 grand and uses this tiny SD card.
This little chip can record a high-definition picture in this little package that took this to record a standard definition picture, 30 years ago.
And WJAC has also taken flight with our drone, Skyview 6. It takes 2 people to capture video from the drone, 1 licensed pilot and 1 certified camera operator, to bring you images from as high as 400 feet from the ground.
Almost everything we do involves a computer server, and that process of recording pictures and sound on a computer and then processing it in some way, editing it, doing something to it, and then playing it back out with almost flawless quality.
WJAC's film collection is made up of 800 reels of film. That stretches about 227 miles long, give or take. We've been converting our film archives to Blu-ray discs, cataloging our station's film footage to preserve it for decades to come. WJAC's ability to take you right to where news is happening is what we do best, and the process is faster and easier than ever before. Just grab and go.
The first thing we had was a portable microwave. It was a box about that big with a little rod on the end, but you put it on top of a post that you had to extend like 5 sections up 20 feet.
And we have these station wagons that we used to drive back in the 80s, and to make your portable pole to set your set your signal up, you had to get this pole and drive over it with your wheel to weigh it down. And then that wasn't the only part. You had to push it up into 4 different phases. So it was like, it was a pretty good workout trying to get that up to about 25 feet.
And it got heavy when it was up. You're pushing it up with a cable and everything, and in the cold, you're freezing, it's raining. But you were by yourself. You had to do that, then set up the camera, and it had to be line of sight with the transmitter.
Later, WJAC started broadcasting live from microwave trucks. There was no more heavy lifting, but it took advanced planning and many people to pull it off. Microwave live shots need a straight line of sight path too, plus heavy rain, sleet, or snow could weaken the signal or even cause truck operators to lose the live transmission.
You didn't just, when something happened, all of a sudden go out and jump into a truck and drive there and shoot it live.
Well, first off, as you recall, Lanny Bruin would get his maps out.
I had maps. I'd crawl on the floor, lay maps out, and plot it and see if the signal would go through, or if there was a mountain in the way, or something like that. And
we'd have to get the maps where the hills were between here and Johnstown, because it was line of sight. The signal would be line of sight. And there were times, Phillipsburg in the western part of Center County is a good link down to Johnstown. And there's a fire tower over there. This is a true story. Lanny had this thing, it looked like one of those snow globes that kids sit on and go down. He had this big dish. And he would have me going up 3 or 4 flights in this fire tower and literally be strapped to the side. He'd be on the ground with the little meters going, move it here, move it. Oh, okay, we got a signal right there. It's windy up there, and that's how we got a signal. We literally had to hold the equipment in place to get a signal to bounce from Center County over to the other part down to Johnstown. We did that more than once.
With the microwave, where you have a mast that's put up by air, it extends roughly 40 feet, and you had wind to contend with, and the biggest thing is lightning. If you had any lightning, any thunder nearby, that mast went down, and the poor producers back here had to scramble because they knew they wasn't going to get their story in.
WJAC then invested in a $200,000 satellite truck. It looks a lot like a microwave truck, but instead must have a direct line of sight to the sky.
It opened up a lot more possibilities for us as far as being able to go live from anywhere.
Now WJAC TV's live capabilities fit into this backpack. It's called Live View. The gear costs a lot less, coming in at about $30,000.
Right, Live View, which uses the cellular network, the cellular technology, and it's just a small box that really one person can handle that delivers top quality pictures and sound from pretty much anywhere where there's cell coverage, back to our studio. So that has really, really enhanced our capabilities, and at the same time made it so much easier for everybody concerned.
And our drone pilots can even use Live View when flying Skyview 6, giving you a live perspective hundreds of feet above the ground.
It does bring back some fantastic pictures.
And it doesn't cost as nearly as much as a helicopter.
Yeah, that's for sure. And gives us a really excellent vantage point for covering just about anything.
Have you ever noticed that WJAC meteorologists don't wear the color green? Because this is what happens when they do. Improvements in technology have drastically changed the way WJAC brings you the forecast. You could call it the weather revolution.
Well, first of all, we didn't have access to weather radar, the luxury they have now. So we had to rely on printed copy coming out of Pittsburgh at the National Weather Service. By the time we got it in our hands off the teletype, much time had passed already. We knew that they were sitting out in Pittsburgh with probably little idea what was going on here in the Laurel Mountains. And we knew that you always have what we call the uplift of the mountains that would trigger snow squalls and all that sort of thing. So after a while, you got the hang of doing the weather for this area, and you got better at it, quite frankly. You never were perfect, but you got better at it.
WJAC is headquartered in Johnstown, but our viewing area covers 10 counties with 3 distinct climates. And that means forecasts can vary depending on where you're watching us from.
And it's fun around here in this area because of the terrain and also our latitude around the Earth. So we're roughly at 40 degrees north in latitude, and that line the whole way around the globe is where there's typically a lot of active weather and a pretty active storm track. So you combine that with our terrain, especially between October through March, and it's busy.
Trained and certified WJAC meteorologists academically understand the science behind what drives the weather. And now when severe weather threatens your neighborhood, the latest technology allows our meteorologists to give you life-saving information.
We can get right down to street level mapping and show you where it is. So it could be at your cousin's house 5 minutes up the road, and you know it's coming because you're watching us. I'd say the biggest leap in technology comes with using our Futurecast model. And back then, it would take you probably a solid hour to maybe an hour and 15 minutes for basically 48 hours worth of data to what's called render. And that is to be ingested into the weather graphics system and be built into what you see on TV now as clouds and precipitation floating across the screen. Now it's instantaneous. Another tool that we have is being able to take just a general thunderstorm that can be up to 250 miles away, and we could slice the storm into the horizontal and take a look at it vertically then. So once we slice the storm, and then it'll show us how tall that storm is. Is it 30,000 feet or is it 40,000 feet? And the taller it is, the stronger it is. So as it continues to build up and get higher and higher and higher, you know that something bad is probably going to come from it once it gets to where we are. And that's one of the cool things that we can do now is take a look at that storm, slice it, and see how high it does extend into the atmosphere.
In WJAC's early days, Weather in Motion drew countless letters from viewers all asking the same question. How did you do that?
Well, here's how we did that. In front of the camera was a thing called polarized glass that they would mount in front of the camera, and it was run by a motor, and it would rotate at a certain rate. The light reflection going through that polarized glass gave you the pulsating effect.
Now it's all computer generated, and when severe weather strikes, it affects our news department too.
Snow days were a nightmare for here, because not only did you have to get here, but then you had 4,000 calls from school districts telling you that they were either on a delay or closed. And back then, we didn't have an automatic system. We had to type them in. So literally, there would be times when myself or my co-anchor would not be on the air. We were upstairs typing in school delays or closings.
Non-stop.
Non-stop.
My personal protest was after we got a postcard or a phone call or something after one of my live shots, and it was chilly out. It was in the teens or something, and I'm standing there just like this. I'm not a hat wearer by nature, and hats tend to be difficult for on air. So I started wearing all kinds of different hats after she complained that I wasn't wearing a hat and I was setting a bad example for the children. I said, well, we can't have that. I had a 10-gallon Stetson. I had a ski mask. I pulled it down, just my lips and eyes were showing. There were a number of other hats. I left right at the end of 1998, and that Christmas, my oldest daughter got me an Elmer Fudd hat as a joke Christmas gift and said, you have to wear this on the air before you leave. And so, as it turns out, that last week I worked and caught a snow story, and I wore the hat. It was, you know, that hunting cap look. It was just disgustingly stupid, but I loved it.
Ever wonder what it means when our building's cupola is lit up in color? Well, green basically means the next day is going to be dry, and red, vice versa. Red means we can expect either rain or snow, even ice the next day. WJAC's newsroom has grown from a handful of people to a sizable staff covering news 24/7. In the early days, it consisted of manual typewriters and maps. There were no computers or cell phones.
In 1957, they were deciding to organize a news department. And up until that point, the only thing that was done with news was with stories by reporters at the newspaper. And they reported to the newspaper, do the stories, and run them over to the TV station, and that's how they did it. And they had no employee in the news department. So I was the first person hired full-time in the news department.
There was only like 4 of us in the newsroom. Ron Stevenson, who sat right there, me, and Ron Miller and John Torres. Now we had 2 photographers, Andy Rakowski and Ray Kleitz. They were in another room.
People often ask, what hours do you work? And I said, what do you mean, what hours do I work? I said, I work all the time. They said, yeah, but you work 8 hours a day, don't you? And I said, sure. But sometimes we work 10, 12, 14 hours too. It just depended on what was happening, because we didn't have a staff at that time. So we drove our own cars in those days, and the first thing we bought was a Bell & Howell camera. Took 100-foot roll of film, black and white film. It also take color, but at that time we weren't shooting color. So we kept that camera with us all the time, and lots of times people accused me of taking the camera to bed with me, and sometimes my wife thought it was in bed with us too, because It just seemed like I was forever getting out of bed in the middle of the night. Stevenson would call and say, "Hey, Kleitz, take off." He said, "There's a fire over in someplace out of town."
I never saw anybody with more contacts than Ron Stevenson. You'd have people feeding him news tips all the time.
Ron had all kinds of connections for getting news, and he would never, ever let you know who those contacts were. It was always kept confidential. So he was a good newsman.
When I was a little kid, growing up, I remember being 7, 8 years old, and I said, I looked at Ron Stevenson doing the news one night. I want to sit in that chair.
And the sports, we had Bill Wilson, of course, and he had an assistant who helped him and shot his stuff.
He knew a lot of people, and he nurtured his own business. He loved sports. That's all there is to it.
The very early days of television were done strictly as a booth announcer and a voice-over still picture or a slide. And the first programs that we did were in the area of reporting news, and that was done over slide or a voice-over film that had been sent to the station to use in a 15-minute news program. The very first newsman on the station was Ron Reininger.
I was hired as, the position was staff announcer, and there were 3 of us, Ron Lawrence, Steve Richard, and me. And our basic job, and I tell people this and they go, "No, you're kidding." And I said, "You know where the announce booth is, on the first floor." Your shift was you would sit in that announce booth, and every half hour you'd push a button, microphone and a little soundboard there, it's still there, push a button and say WJAC TV Johnstown. And I would tell people that I did that, and they said, no, it was all recorded. I said, no, back then it was all live.
We'd actually roll cars in here and shoot commercials. Bill Wilson would come in and he'd look at a script and say, "Okay, I'm ready." He'd stand there and read off a 30-second script from memory.
And we used to do the news on these quick sets, was what they were. And they had carbon paper in between, like 6 pages of paper. And you would type your story, and then you'd rip them apart.
And so I had to literally rip the things apart, make 5 piles, you know, and we're on deadline here. And they're just giving me the show now, and I'm ripping, and the director's grabbing his and marking, you know, and yelling stuff. And a lot of times, especially on the noon show, I would be on my knees in the control room with the Scotch tape, trying to stay ahead of Bill Brown.
You would take the white copy and tape it end to end to end to end to end and make this giant ribbon of copy. And then we had a camera that was mounted on a conveyor belt, and the camera just looked down and you'd roll and it would go off all the time. You know, you would have trouble, you couldn't read it, but that's how we did it.
I found out that Murphy's Law prevailed at all times. Gremlins were born and raised in television studios. I've known teleprompters that ran too fast, that ran too slowly, teleprompters that didn't run at all. And then one day, much to my chagrin, I had to walk from the news set to the commercial set, having ad-libbed that part of the commercial. And when I got to the point where I had to tramp on the pedal on the floor, I found out that, oh yes, the prompter was running, but it was running backwards.
So you'd go out in the middle of the night and hope you were going the right direction. We didn't have radios in the car, and lots of times you'd no sooner pull out of the driveway and whatever they'd called to send you out on wasn't there any longer. So you might spend hours going someplace and get there and you couldn't find anything.
You had to rely on paper maps. And some of those paper maps, you actually had to get into topography maps in order to find areas where you were trying to get to. Just a regular road map wouldn't help. It was communications with other people trying to find out where and how to get to locations. GPS wasn't even heard of back then. Compass and driving and missing a road, turning around and going finding another one. It was all hunt and search.
You can imagine what it's like when you had your first computer and you started, switched from whatever you were doing before and you went to computers. And I would tell people would complain about doing that and said, can't do this. I can do it easier and faster if I just do it with the typewriter. I do it the my regular way. And I kept trying to tell people that you're right, it would, but once you learn to use the computer, it's going to be much faster and much easier to do.
It made it so much easier for them to change scripts and not have to retype the whole thing.
Master Control handles switching the various programs onto the air and inserting the commercials and the news segments at the right time.
I can't believe the control room when I look at it tape from when we started. It's unbelievable. Anybody who has not seen that doesn't understand it. I saw it from the beginning when you did it. Everything until the day is so quiet in that control room. I never heard a control room that quiet. When I was there, you had to scream to be heard. All the equipment made noise.
And now everything is like what they call servers. You know, they have the shows, the commercials, everything's in there, and then the computer runs it. So it's not like you don't have to tell somebody to roll something and put it on the air manually or anything like that. It's all automatic now. So
it's all automated, but the true skill is when things change, when there's breaking news, when there's a severe weather cut-in, when the baseball game runs late. That's when the true skill of the operator comes forth. And we have some very skilled people on staff here that handle that.
Sometimes we tramped on some toes. Sometimes we did a lot of good for the community. I think, and it's been proven many times, that a camera can get things done that a lot of words can't. And if problems were in certain sections of the country or around the town and somebody wanted something done, 20-second story on television would get it done for them.
When I first started, it was basically Johnstown. Johnstown that we covered. We had a stringer that lived in Altoona, Larry Field, and he would cover the Altoona area, but our primary thing was we covered Johnstown. Once we started expanding the newscast from just a 6 and 11, we started expanding to the morning news and an hour, and then an hour and a half of newscasts, and in the late afternoon, early evening. You had to fill it with something. So competition meant that you had to go out into outlying areas.
In the late 70s and early 80s, our news department was restructured. The number of employees doubled, which included the addition of field reporters.
Our areas is in such where we're located, most of our areas are a good 2-hour drive away. We're not centrally located within our ADI, and it makes it hard to get around. So a lot of the photographers and reporters' time is spent on the road commuting back and forth. That was then. Nowadays, they've got bureaus with reporters and photographer reporters in the bureaus, and electronics that they can just take. They don't have to come back. There again, technology has made it so much easier to cover the news.
WJAC TV also moved ahead with the total conversion of our news department from film to videotape. And in 1981, News Center 6 went on the air with a new set and co-anchors. We also opened news bureaus in areas like Altoona and State College.
When I started, we had a bureau up here with 2 others. And at the time, there has always been, how do we transmit our stories from State College, which is 89 miles away? At the time, there was a Greyhound bus that left State College. It left at 1:30. So whatever stories we had, and we were on tape then, whatever stories we had to get to the bus station in State College by 1:30, and then we had to hope that the Altoona station didn't take that package off accidentally, and also that it got to Johnstown by 3:30 and there was somebody there to get it on the air by 5. So if it happened like afternoon here, it was a story the next day. And that's how we did it for several years until they got a transmission system that was a little bit better. But our first, we called it Pony Express. We literally put our stories on a Greyhound bus.
In 1983, the Center County Report premiered in the 6 p.m. weekday news block. Viewers on the Center Video Cable System began to receive a pre-taped news segment devoted specifically to their area.
So we would tape a show, that would be inserted in the regular newscast. But where the tape had to run to get to Johnstown was not where we were doing the taping. It was about 5 or 6 miles away. So we had to literally physically drive tape to what was called the head end. And sometimes it was pretty close because we knew exactly it had to be in the machine, the player machine at the head end by a certain time, or if it didn't make the newscast.
I extensively covered news in, well, every county in our market and some outside of our market. And I knew people in every one of those. So that takes some time to develop, and you can't just walk in, you know, once every year and go, hey, how you doing? Who are you? I didn't get that instantly. It took me a number of years until I had that.
It was amazing because people would invite me into their homes and then tell you the most like intimate, like personal stories and share so much to help other people. And those were the things that just left you in awe, that people would be so willing to share to help other people.
In 1985, the News Center 6 first edition premiered at 6:30 a.m. That same year, the Center County Report was added to the 11 p.m. news block. And a few years later, the Center County Report expanded in the 6 p.m. blocks to 2 segments, running about 10 minutes long, including brief sports and weather information.
Went in against the Blades with 11 men, and most of them pretty tired from a long
grew up
season.
watching Bill Wilson, and that's what I wanted to do, you know. He got to talk to the stars. In my eyes, the people that I idolized as a young kid watching sports, he was right there talking to them. I mean, the Pirates, the Steelers, you name it. You name anybody in the world of sports who was nationally known, at some point, Bill interviewed them.
The Steelers and the Penguins and the Pirates, and of course the major college crowds, the Penn States, the Pitts, the West Virginias, along of course with the IUPs and the St. Francis clubs and the UPJs. We got into traveling with the Pirates and the Johnstown Jets hockey team into their training camps and the Steeler camps. Things like Willie Stargell starting out as a rookie. They're the Steelers, of course, right from Joe Green and Terry Bradshaw right on through their careers. Now they're retired. And, of course, the one closest to our heart here, Jack Ham.
But it was not only that. He hit everything.
The Pitt Championship in '76, a long relationship with Joe Paterno over 18 years of his coaching. And, of course, down at Pitt, I've had them all. I've had Hart and DePasqua and Majors and Sherrill, and now on into DeFazio. There are so many things. The 2 world championships of the Pirates, the 4 Super Bowl rings of the Steelers.
I can still remember my dad coached gymnastics. He covered gymnastics.
AAABA tournaments, the Sonny Hanna Amateurs.
And I'll never forget my dad sitting at home watching the film of the gymnastics, and it might have been 30 or seconds or a minute. And at the end, he just looked at the TV and said, "Attaboy, Bill." In other words, he was so appreciative to get that coverage. And that's something that stuck with me when I got into sports, that there is an audience for every sport, no matter how minor you might think it is. Somebody who truly appreciates that you're going out there and giving them some coverage. So
the only thing I can say, we have still only scratched the surface. Technology will get better. Our staff will most likely increase. We will be able to cover more and better things for you. That is my hope, of course. The first 35, I'm sure, have been great, and I'm sure they'll even be greater 35 years down the road.
Well, I always remembered that boy Bill when I was doing sports and when Bill had left, and I'd get those phone calls, and I found out it's pretty difficult to be the guy to say no to somebody. So we would cover, you know, all the sports that we could.
You don't have to be in front of your TV to see WJAC. We now come to you through your desktop, cell phone, or tablet. You can find us on social media and online at WJACTV.com. In fact, hundreds of thousands of people visit our website each week. For decades, WJAC was a privately owned family business, and over that time, a father and then later his son were tapped to manage the television station. Here, the two share the story of how WJAC signed on with the oldest major broadcast network in the United States.
I was always curious, how did we end up to be an NBC affiliate? And he said, well, actually, that wasn't his first choice. He thought at the time, because CBS was kind of the older network, and a little more established. When he went to New York, he went to see the CBS folks. They told him to wait out in the waiting area, and somebody would be out. And he was there like at 8 o'clock in the morning. He waited all morning. Nobody came out. He was getting a little upset. Nobody ever came out to see him.
I sat in their office for heaven knows how long. The appointment hour passed and I sat. And finally, I got up, a little irritated, and I said to Herb Akerberg's secretary, "You tell Mr. Akerberg that Mr. Schrott said goodbye."
And so he went and got a bite to eat, and on the way back, he passed the RCA building where NBC was at the time. He went up to the NBC offices and said, "Hey, I have a license in Johnstown, Pennsylvania."
I went over to the NBC office and said, "Where's the contract?"
They came right out and saw him and inked the deal.
That's how we went with the Peacock.
WJAC took pride in bringing our audience special programming over the years, from Scholastic Quiz to Romper Room and Morning Break, shows that proved to be both popular and fun.
All the questions were produced by the College of Old Quiz Company. And I'd get this packet of questions, and we'd have, I'd have a chance to go over them, and we'd record the show on Wednesday nights. Schools from all around the area came and participated in this, and it was co-sponsored by the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. And it got so popular that we were getting requests from schools down towards Harrisburg, down in Maryland.
I can't help but feel that that Morning Break, that is now entering its 4th season, and we thought about putting that together, well, 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, is kind of like I consider it to be the golden age of television now, because it combines the tradition, the excellence of those earlier years with 1980 plus technology.
We ran the Jerry Lewis Muscular Dystrophy Telethon for a number of years, and I was lucky to be a host of it for many of those years. And we would have, like, firemen from around the area would take their boots out and get contributions from guys, people going past in their cars. It was a thing the firemen did. And then other people would just join in, canvass their neighborhoods, taking up collections, and they would bring all that money into the station, where we had a big, I think it was like a fishbowl, big glass fishbowl, and we would talk to them on camera. Where are you from, and where did you canvass to get the money and all that? And we had them lined up from the studio through the front of the building here, out into the parking lot to get in with dumping their money in.
Hi, I'm Patricia Hewitt, but maybe you remember me better as Miss Patty. I was the romper room teacher here at WJAC for 13 years, from 1960 until 1973. My, I certainly did have a good time. In fact, why don't you come along with me right now? Let's go back and reminisce a little bit about the romper room days. Bouncing and bouncing, woo! See me bounce the ball, good! Let's take a look at my mailbox right now. Do you know my address? Does anybody remember the romper room, WJAC TV in Johnstown, Pennsylvania? 15907 is our zip code. Mirror today. Have all my friends had fun at play? I see Earl. And my goodness, Jamie, you've gotten to be such a big boy. And there's Jessica. What a nice girl you are. I see Susie and so many of my good old Doobie friends. It's so good to see you again. Yes, indeed, it's good to see everybody again. It feels just like the good old days. I really miss you, and I have such wonderful, beautiful memories of you being my friend in Romper Room School.
And we can't forget our versions of the Christmas cartoon classics. They're a holiday staple, a tradition here at WJAC.
They bugged me like crazy. I had to have a schedule about when is they wanted to record them, and they had to know when it was. I got so many calls about that.
Those cartoon classics almost ended up in a landfill. When moving departments, the cartoons were found in a pile of trash to be pitched. Fortunately, this was salvaged too. It could quite possibly be the first WJAC employee manual ever printed. It outlines our company's policies and procedures decades ago. And while those conditions have changed over the years, the news policy on page 19 caught my eye. Words to still live and work by today. Our news policy is to broadcast the news without fear or favor, to
evaluate it as honestly and objectively as humanly possible, to respect the rights of all groups and individuals. We do not play favorites.
And by the same token, we have no blacklists.
We listen to the voice of the little person as intently as we do that of the big name. We place a premium on accuracy and pursue it constantly. Above all else,
we bear in mind constantly that each story we write is the most important story of the day to someone. That's our commitment to you. Coverage you can count on. Thanks for helping us to celebrate this milestone, for choosing WJAC, and for being here with us through the years and memories, serving millions from atop the Alleghenies.